What's up, fight fans? My name's Flyin Brian J. I identify as a hardcore MMA fan and not much of a boxing fan. And for that reason, I don't think I qualify to give you guys a solid breakdown for the upcoming massive fight between Floyd Money Mayweather and the notorious Conor McGregor. So I brought in a striking analysis expert in Conor Ruebusch. He's a writer for BloodyElbow.com. He's a co-host of two of my favorite podcasts. One, Heavy Hands, alongside Dr. Patrick Wyman, where they go over the finer points of face punching, and also the MMA Vivisection with Zane Simon, where they give you in-depth breakdowns for every single fight on every single major MMA event. Conor, thank you so much for joining me and for doing this.
I am absolutely happy to be here and happy to find the most interesting wrinkles in this very strange fight.
I know you're going to deliver on a whole bunch of wrinkles, and I've got a lot of questions for you. I'm going to be honest that are going to come from a casual fan perspective. So I know you're all about the finer points of face punching, and we'll get to those, but I want to start with some super broad stuff. So we've got Conor McGregor, Floyd Money Mayweather. Since I'm coming from the MMA background, I want to know a little bit more about the boxing side. So Floyd Mayweather is widely regarded as the greatest boxer of all time. He's 49-0 as a professional boxer, which that right there is an indicator of greatness. But so my first question to you is, what beyond that number makes him so great?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would say Floyd is head and shoulders with the best of his generation. He had a very long time, a long period of dominance, and some people would say that in his era, Manny Pacquiao was the guy who had the more impressive feats, had the more memorable matchups and series with fighters like Juan Manuel Marquez and Marco Antonio Barrera and Eric Morales, all legends. And Floyd doesn't necessarily have that, but he does have that undefeated record. And while people pick apart the matchmaking of Floyd's career and criticize it a lot, you can't deny that he has outclassed, outsmarted, and sometimes even outfought a whole slew of extremely impressive fighters. I guess the thing I would say that sets Floyd apart from the rest of his generation, the thing that makes him not, in my opinion, very close to the greatest of all time, but certainly possibly the greatest of his era, is the fact that he is sort of a fighter out of another era. He focuses on a lot of things that modern boxers, I think, tend to let fall to the wayside. Everything Floyd Mayweather does is systematic. He comes from a boxing family with a fully fledged system of techniques. His uncle Roger, his father Floyd Sr., both of these guys were great boxers, professional boxers themselves. And since he was a very young boy, that was the world Floyd grew up in. And there's a great piece out there I would recommend people check out called by Charles Farrell, who was a boxing manager and is a great writer. And he basically called Floyd Mayweather the last black code fighter, the last fighter of this sort of type in the US of like black defensive specialists, who that style kind of came out of an era where these fighters were not getting the opportunities to fight for world titles and were having to fight crazy schedules just to get enough money in their pockets to live. And so they developed great defense. And nothing Mayweather ever does, learning from this sort of legacy, nothing he ever does in the ring is improvised or guesswork. Everything fits together. It's all ingrained. Everything is almost automatic, where Mayweather just feels the attack coming and he responds correctly. And he does that no matter how good the opponent is. He does it no matter how unorthodox. He does it to southpaws. He does it to right-handers. No matter who you put in front of Floyd Mayweather, give him about 4 rounds and he will have figured out basically everything they're going to do to him. And that is what makes him special, that there are not a lot of fighters today that you can say that about, that they are that systematic, that technically sound, and that free to think about the fight in a big picture sense, because all of their reactions in the moment are just taken care of from the get-go.
So that thing you said about after 4 rounds, he gets them figured out. A lot of people think that Conor McGregor needs to finish the fight within those 4 rounds. And of course, we will get to that. The article that you were mentioning there, I'll put in the description box below when we're done talking, along with your credentials, where people can find you on Bloody Elbow and also on Twitter and all of that jazz. So even people like I was talking to you off air about people on my Facebook channel. They know about this fight. It's a huge fight. Casual fans are super excited about it. And last week I was at a family event and my sister-in-law was talking about how mostly a defensive boxer and he's kind of boring. But in order to win fights, it's not just about evading the punches. You also have to return fire. And so I watched a little bit of film so I could be prepared to talk to you. And I saw that Floyd is also a magnificent counter striker. So my question is, do you think that because of his defensive stylings, he gets kind of a bad reputation as being a boring fighter when really it's a result of, like you said, some high fight IQ?
Yeah, I mean, it's not ever totally fair to tell someone you're not allowed to be bored by this. I have to be understanding. But as somebody who appreciates good technique, while Mayweather's fights might not get me on the edge of my seat every time, I might not be thrilled and chilled every other second, I got to appreciate what he does. And the defense, the counterpunching, that, again, I think the big thing to emphasize is how systematic it all is. Floyd fights out of that shell stance, and any move he makes, any move you do in boxing or really any fighting sport has a counter. There's always a way to punish someone for doing something. And the way to resolve that issue is to always have the next response in place, have it trained in, have it so that it flows off of what you just did. So if Floyd catches a jab with his right hand, he's not going to be guessing when the right hand comes after that jab. You know, like a 1-2 is not going to surprise him, because when he does that, the automatic response is, there's the right hand, catch it on my shoulder. Everything's in its place. And so that, I think, is what allows Floyd to be creative and to improvise how and when he places his counter punches. All the defensive reactions are taken care of. And so he gets to decide when the opening is there, how hard he wants to strike, and how often he wants to have those kind of exchanges at all. It seems very unlikely to me that McGregor is going to be able to overwhelm Mayweather early, because A, he's obviously not the first guy to try to put the pressure on Floyd Mayweather. He's dealt with that with a lot of guys. That's typically been the idea of how you're supposed to fight Floyd, is go after him early and fight hard. B, he controls his opponents with that defense and with the counters. You take a few jabs to the belly, you take a few quick counter right hands, all of your shots are missing or glancing off. It doesn't feel good. It breaks the confidence of most fighters to know, you know, to try their best, to try all of their tricks. 4 rounds for an inexperienced boxer is about as much time as they need to show every trick they have in their toolkit. And at the end of that 4 rounds, Floyd Mayweather has just assessed what you have. He hasn't even started reaching into his own toolkit yet. And so the tricky thing is making it out of those 4 rounds, not knocking Floyd out, something which has never been done or even approached by some pretty hard punchers, but going through those 4 rounds, putting on that pressure without entering the 5th round with a feeling of completely missing confidence, without letting the fact that you're missing and getting hit and being punished totally destroy your feeling for the fight as a whole. And that's the difficult part. That's something that, again, it's something that very experienced professional boxers have never managed to do. 9 of them were southpaws. One of those southpaws was Manny Pacquiao. Another was Zab Judah. It's not as if Mayweather has never faced a hard puncher or somebody with a left hand or somebody who puts on the pressure or swarms. Or even somebody who assumes that maybe infighting and wrestling is going to be their solution. He's dealt with all of those things in the boxing rule set. And so can you make it out of those 4 rounds and be on the same footing as Mayweather? It's hard. That's hard to see.
And you mentioned that a fighter as inexperienced as Conor McGregor will often expose all of their weapons within the first 4 rounds or show all of their toolkit. And Conor McGregor, even in mixed martial arts realm, he doesn't have that many tools. I mean, he has a lot of stuff that he uses to set up the tools. Like he used trash talk basically against Aldo. In my opinion, he used a lot of bravado against Alvarez to get Alvarez basically to not wrestle him. Dustin Poirier, Capoeira, Nate Diaz, he mixed in a lot of low kicks and stuff like that. Really, none of that is going to be available to him against Floyd Mayweather.
Right. The big thing with this fight is because one question is, you know, the Brendan Schaub angle, is McGregor going to be bringing in crazy angles and rhythms that boxers will have never seen? First of all, boxers fight bad boxers in the gym. So they know what unorthodox punching looks like. They've experienced that. They've experienced boxing is not one style. When you fight 49 guys, you faced wild punchers and unorthodox punchers and people with weird jittery rhythms. Way early in his career, Mayweather fought a guy named DeMarcus Corley, Chop Chop Corley, who gave him a really tough fight. And Corley is a weird, awkward journeyman, and Mayweather took his best shots and beat him up. So the real question is, what does Conor McGregor do that another boxer doesn't? And when we take away all those things you talked about, the other like martial arts, the other sort of esoteric techniques he brings into his game, the things that Conor McGregor does to put him above other MMA fighters is really just good boxing. Pull counters, distance management. He's gotten a better jab these days. Good footwork, defensive and offensive. Like, these are just boxing techniques. So that means that Conor McGregor enters this fight as a pretty good boxer with zero professional boxing experience, rather than as somebody who uses all of the weirdness available to MMA fighters to win his fights. When he beat up Eddie Alvarez, he outboxed him. He just hit him with counter left hands over and over again. And that is not some sort of that's definitely not an unheard of tactic in the world of boxing, to counter with the left hand. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's nothing magical as what a lot of people who are picking Conor McGregor to win. It's just, we talked off air about that X factor. His aura is going to get him this victory. That's not the case. But you mentioned his unorthodox, and fighters in the gym, in practice, boxers in practice, they face guys that have unorthodox styles. But Paulie Malignaggi said that Conor's unorthodox approaches surprised him by how unorthodox they were, and they were more pronounced, and unexpectedly they caused him more problems than he predicted. Do you think, so we're talking about a lot about Paulie Malignaggi, but do you think he's being legitimate there?
I wouldn't be shocked if Mayweather or if McGregor threw him off a bit in sparring. I think it's possible that it'll happen in this fight. Not even thrown off, but somebody as experienced and composed as Mayweather will probably take a little while to get his read, to get a sense for how McGregor moves, how he throws his punches, what his triggers are. But, you know, like, I don't want to discredit Paulie Malignaggi, but even as a sparring partner, I'll say this. I think if that had been 12 rounds of Conor McGregor dominating Paulie Malignaggi, McGregor and the UFC would both jumped at the chance to release the whole fight, the whole sparring session, as soon as possible. I think the fact that we haven't seen anything but about a minute and a half of McGregor's highlights, like the Chris Van Heerden sparring match a couple years ago, suggests that, you know, it was competitive at the very least. Now, being competitive with Paulie Malignaggi is not a bad thing, but there's a huge difference between a Paulie Malignaggi and a Floyd Mayweather. There is Malignaggi doesn't have the speed, the dexterity. He doesn't have the same well-schooled system just completely ingrained into his body. And he doesn't have Mayweather's mind for fighting. Malignaggi is emotional, right? He's a guy who gets emotional and lets that affect the way he fights. Mayweather makes you emotional. Mayweather makes you afraid or tentative or nervous or angry, and that never happens to him. And that's usually McGregor's move too, is to make the other guy more emotional. But that's usually when McGregor has some sort of strong technical advantage. Usually that's his striking. He's a better striker than most of the people he fights in MMA. And that is not the case in this fight. That is just not the case. And also, I don't want to, I'm sorry, I do want to say, like, I don't want to, there are boxing people out there saying that, like, McGregor is a trash fighter, that he's not a good boxer, which he is in MMA especially. And I'm sure if McGregor dedicated himself to professional boxing, he could probably go quite far. He's a great athlete. He's an intelligent fighter. He has a lot of things that he seems to grasp easily that other people struggle to learn for years: rhythm, timing, distance. He gets all those things. So he's naturally cut out for fist fighting, and boxing falls under that umbrella. The only thing is that I would compare Conor McGregor to a triathlete. And no one's going to say that the world's best triathlete is not a great runner. But if the world's best triathlete competes in a marathon against the world's best marathon runner, there's very little reason to suspect that the man who has diversified and spread out all of his training resources throughout his life is going to be able to keep up with the specialist who only runs marathons.
That's an amazing comparison. That's really solid. The only point I was going to make was Paulie, not only is he not Floyd Mayweather, but he was coming off the couch, as they would say. He wasn't in training camp. He said he went in there to expect 4 rounds, or he wanted to be part of the game planning, and then they just brought him in to do 2 sparring sessions or whatever. Do you take away anything from him saying that Conor won the majority of the rounds?
I don't know.
Until we see it.
Not until I see it. I don't want to, like, it's hard to read too much into a sparring match. I mean, you will not find a person on the planet who enjoys finding sparring footage more than me. Like, if I find a great fighter sparring footage, I'll watch Roman Gonzalez sparring or Mike Tyson sparring or whoever for hours on end. But that's the point, is I want to see the sparring. Unless I can see the sparring, see what kind of shape Paulie was in, see how the pacing of the fight was, see how Malignaggi responded, like how capable he was of using all of his tricks and tools to counter Conor. I'd have to see that. So it's hard for me to read too much into it at this time.
So what we did see was a knockdown. Was it a push? Can we take anything away from that 10 seconds?
A referee would have called it a knockdown, I think. They might have called it a slip, but he hit him on the temple and then he went down. And even if you get hit in the body and fall over, they will call that a knockdown in boxing. So, yeah, I call that a knockdown. I wouldn't say it didn't look like he badly hurt Paulie Malignaggi. He was off balance and in a bad position. And he definitely looked bigger than Paulie. Like, he was really muscling him around inside in those clips that I saw. Not even really with technique, just kind of being a bigger guy, laying on him the way a lot of boxers do nowadays, which is kind of disappointing to me. I was kind of hoping that, like, when the MMA fighter went into boxing, we'd see a return of the old school inside fighting that boxers used to do, which looked a lot like clinch fighting in MMA. And instead, McGregor's in the boxing ring with Malignaggi, and he's just clinching like a boxer now, which is a little disappointing. But yeah, it's hard to know how much to draw from that. I will say that unless these last 2 years have really done a number on Floyd, which, judging by his physical appearance, they don't seem to have. He's always been a guy who's kept himself in fantastic shape. Then what is the reason to believe that Conor McGregor's power is going to be something Mayweather has never experienced? Shane Mosley hit Floyd Mayweather on the side of the head with a huge right hand, buckled his knees, and 20 seconds later, Mayweather had survived and he was back in the fight. In his last fight, in the fight with Manny Pacquiao, Pacquiao staggered Mayweather in the 4th round. Chop Chop Corley, who I talked about before, hurt McGregor on a couple occasions. The guy has a chin. That's the thing people forget, because he has this slick, classy, sort of, artful style. People think he can't fight. It's just that it doesn't make sense for Mayweather to fight. That's not the safest and surest way to win, but the man can take a shot. He can fight with intensity and ferocity when he needs to teach his opponent a lesson. And I'll just say again, like many, many opponents, 49 of them exact, have had the idea that if I just land that one big shot, or if I make it a messy fight and take him out of his game, or whatever the theory is, they've all thought that would be the key to beating Mayweather. And it generally takes about 4 rounds before Mayweather even convinces them that they are not going to win.
So recently there was a guy on Reddit, RMMA. His name is Trap City Bitch, which solid name, man. I can't. He crunched some numbers.
The Trap City Bitch?
No, just Trap City Bitch.
But nope. This is the one I've heard of. I mean, this is the one everyone's talking about on the streets.
Yeah, that's the one.
The Trap City Bitch.
It could be. It doesn't say real. It doesn't say the real. It could be an impersonator.
At Real Trap City Bitch. Yeah. Well, I'm honored to receive a question from my hero.
They got a check mark next to their name on a blue check on Reddit. I think that means they're legitimate.
Yeah. Nice.
But anyway, they crunched some numbers, and they said in Mayweather's last 10 fights, his opponents threw about 5,000 punches at him. I think the official number was 5,150, and they only landed 20% of them. So that's not good. You mentioned Conor McGregor. Does he have the one-punch knockout power? I'm doubting it, but something that you mentioned, something that was disappointing something that was disappointing to a lot of pundits. I know Luke Thomas wasn't really happy about it, but on Wednesday, August 16th, the Nevada State Athletic Commission decided to allow Mayweather versus McGregor to happen using 8-ounce gloves. What are your thoughts on the switch of the equipment, and do you think the shift of the equipment will have any factor in the fight? I mean, obviously it's different, but will the outcome change at all?
I have a feeling that Mayweather allowed that to happen because when it's a Floyd Mayweather fight and some weird thing in the rules happens or something with the gloves or the tape or whatever, it usually has something to do with Floyd's say-so. The commissions have a history, especially in Nevada, of doing absolutely anything Floyd asks them to do. So I have a feeling that this happened not because the commission thought it would be fun, but A, because Mayweather thought it might sell the fight, B, because if somebody's going to be covering up and depending on their gloves to protect them, it's probably not going to be Floyd Mayweather, who uses his shoulders and head movement and his feet. Having a little less in the way to cover is not really something that hurts somebody with his style that much. I will say that Floyd has been fighting for years with really cushy foam gloves because he used to break his hands all the time, which is why, like in the early days, you watch his fight with Diego Corrales and he would mop the floor with this great aggressive boxer and really just beat him up. And now he can't throw those power punches the same way because his hands aren't in great condition. So maybe that could affect this fight, but I imagine that a difference of 2 ounces, Floyd's still going to go in there wearing winning gloves or Grant gloves or whatever kind of gloves he wants to wear. They're just going to be 2 ounces lighter. So I don't really think it'll have much of an impact on the fight, to be honest.
Yeah, my initial reaction as the MMA fan that I am, which I'm going to put it out there, I'm kind of hoping that McGregor shakes up the world, but my initial reaction was perhaps it gives Conor a better chance of knocking Floyd out. But then I saw that Floyd says that he wants a better chance of knocking Conor McGregor out. And then, of course, I was going to ask you about the increased possibility of Floyd breaking his hands. But so
yeah, I mean, I don't think those 2 ounces tend to make a huge difference in the outcome of fights. Generally, if somebody hits hard and they want to mess up people's faces and break their ribs and knock them out, they'll wear gloves that are made of horsehair or a much thinner foam that weighs as much as the cushier gloves, but you can feel the knuckles through it. So, but again, McGregor would have had that option with 10-ounce gloves. They maybe would have been a little less knuckle to skin contact, but Mayweather used to fight in 8-ounce gloves. He came up as a sub-welterweight fighter and was, an Olympian as a fighter at, I think, featherweight. And so he used to be, I think the cutoff is super middleweight is where you start wearing 10-ounce gloves, and below that, everyone wears 8 ounces. So Mayweather's worn them both. I would be surprised if the difference of 2 ounces in glove size really gives Conor a much bigger chance. Although, like you, who the hell wouldn't want to see Conor McGregor win, right? Like, I want to see something crazy happen. Yeah.
Who doesn't love chaos?
Yeah, of course.
But so can you elaborate on the weight classes? So obviously boxing weight classes are completely different from mixed martial arts. I think, does the cutoff 147?
It might be 147. It might be 154. It's either welterweight or junior middle. But yeah, there's a rule basically where the gloves for the smaller guys are slightly smaller and the gloves for the bigger guys are 2 ounces bigger. I never imagined it made a huge difference. What matters more to the individual fighter is what make and what style of glove they wear, which can fit into any weight category. It's just a matter of what kind of glove it is. And we have to remember too, like for Mayweather's hands, that is the point of boxing gloves, is not to protect people's heads. You get less cuts from knuckles and things, but really it's to protect your hands. Because if you hit someone on the teeth with your bare knuckled fist, you're going to slice up your hand. You're going to maybe break a finger. If you hit them on the top of your head, you're going to fracture your thumb or any number of things. So, 8-ounce gloves that are materially basically the same as his 10-ounce gloves, I imagine Mayweather's hands will be okay.
I found it odd too that they brought in a physician or a doctor to say, "Oh, it wasn't really safe to have the 8 ounces, but he's going to allow it for this one time." When over in mixed martial arts, they're using 4 for 265-pound men. So I don't. I'd like to see the science behind it.
It's kind of an arbitrary rule. I don't think there is science behind it. Same reason that until the last Olympics, amateur boxers for decades were forced to wear headgear, even though scientists were saying, look, I think headgear is more dangerous because they feel like they can take more shots and their head becomes a bigger target and all these things, and they can't see as well because it obstructs your vision. Maybe it would be better just to let them fight bareheaded. But boxing is a sport which is often slow to change. So they'll hold on to this idea that having two extra ounces on your gloves will make a massive difference in how the fight plays out, when I don't think it really does.
That gives me a good segue to go into not slow, but so in boxing, again, if we look at those 51-50 punches thrown at Mayweather,
yeah,
that is a lot of punches to be thrown in 10 bouts. If you look at MMA, that would be an astronomical number. What is it that allows boxers to throw so many more strikes than in mixed martial arts contests? Of course, we're talking about 12 3-minute rounds rather than 5-5, but still, that's crazy.
The range tends to be a little closer in boxing. You don't have to worry about kicks or takedowns. You can focus your attentions mostly on what the other fighter's doing with their upper body, although it pays to pay attention to their feet. But you can really get everything you need to know just looking at the center of a fighter's chest and keeping an eye on his shoulders to see when he's going to throw a punch. So you can afford to stay closer, which means you have more opportunities to land punches. Boxers are also just better punchers than MMA fighters. That probably won't surprise many people, but they throw a lot more punches and the schooling tends to be better. They are very efficient. And a punch is already the most efficient sort of strike you can really throw. Even MMA fighters, you will find across the board that when you look at their strike breakdown, most of their strikes are punches because it's efficient, it's easy, you just have to move your arm, it's close to the target of the face. That's where the most opportunities arise, is something to hit with your hands. So closer range, what else was I saying? Closer range and more technical punching, which means you can throw more punches for a longer period of time without exhausting yourself.
Less clinching. You can't just lay on the fence for a while. They'll
right.
separate you. You can't just do the Randy Couture thing.
Yeah, I think that there's just tends to be a lot more control from boxers, which I don't think is necessarily a knock on mixed martial artists because they have so many things to control that are seemingly disconnected from one another. Like in boxing, you learn to slip to your left. That mechanic also plays into how you throw your right hand. It also plays into how you might move your feet. Like these things all fit together very obviously, whereas learning, tightening up your armbar technique is probably not going to make your jab any better. So boxers, I think, just tend to have a lot more efficiency and fluidity in how they throw their punches, which means they don't get tired out. They can spend more time looking for openings and attacking them. And they also tend to, because they don't have to focus on as many things, they tend to be a lot better defensively. You pointed out Floyd's numbers. I think when he was active, Floyd had the highest strike punch differential in the world of boxing, which means like the highest difference between how many punches opponents land and how many he lands, because he lands like close to 50% of his shots and they land mostly less than 20% of theirs. And when you can make the other guy miss, you can throw a lot more punches more safely. You don't have to worry about any number of different counterattacks that might be coming back when you get to focus all your energies on just avoiding punches. I think it makes a difference.
So Conor McGregor, he's probably going to be throwing full power into every strike, and against Nate Diaz 2 times, he seemed to gas out. I know in the first fight it was a little bit because he was rocked, but people poo-poo on his gas tank quite a bit. Do you think he'll be able to keep up with the pace and go a full 12 rounds with Floyd?
Even if he fights like a moron, which I'm hoping he won't do, then he'll probably be able to last a little longer in a boxing rule set than he would in MMA, because he's not going to be stuffing takedowns. In that Diaz fight, he spent a lot of time, wasted a lot of energy on these big, like dramatic wheel kicks, none of which landed. Kicks take, I would say, about 3 times as much energy as a punch. You can sit there on a heavy bag and throw 100 punches in a row and be a little out of breath if you're not in great shape. You could throw 10 full power kicks in a row and be tired. It takes a lot of energy. So the efficiency of punching compared to other forms of attack probably means McGregor's got a little more time in him. But I think the big thing for Conor is that he can kind of go forever when he's in charge. I really think that his stamina is only an issue when he's not in control of how fast the fight is moving, how many punches are being thrown, or how the opponent is being affected by his punches. So when he hit Nate Diaz clean a lot of times, and then started hitting him a little less cleanly, and then really started trying to hit him and actually missing, and that took a bite out of his confidence. That took a bite out of the feeling that he was in control of the initiative. And I can only imagine how much worse that feeling is when you can't actually land a punch, or when like you land 1 out of every 10 punches or 1 out of every 20, and it's not that clean, or it doesn't have an effect, or the other guy sort of smiles or just ignores it or hits you right back. Those are the kind of things that put you in this like distressed emotional state where your gas tank empties very quickly. And I think it comes down to tension. I think it comes down to like how often you're being called on to suddenly react to things, how much time you spend thinking about what might be coming at any moment. It gives you all of this tension, both mental and physical. And I think the real question will be, how long will it take for Mayweather to start giving McGregor that feeling? Because once I think he starts feeling that feeling, it's going to be hard for him to match the pace and get a second wind against somebody as controlled as Floyd. And then the other question is, what can McGregor possibly do to prevent that? Like, how can McGregor keep the initiative and keep control of the fight against Floyd Mayweather? And that's a very, very tall order.
I was listening to Joe Rogan and Brendan Schaub talk about this fight today. And of course, Brendan Schaub was talking about how, Conor McGregor has a huge chance to win. He has a huge chance to land punches. And they were talking about how Conor switches stance a lot. And because he's got that sideways kind of karate stance, he could perhaps control the distance. Earlier, you were talking about boxers land more punches because of the tighter spacing. Do you think that Conor McGregor's goofy stance, like the karate stance, and his stance switching could help him dictate and keep that bravado?
Floyd fights out of a side stance too. Like, I think that the mistake is to think that all of these MMA things are revolutionary. MMA is mostly a sport made up of other arts. It's not like MMA fighters thought of all of the boxing type things they do. They mostly get them from boxing coaches and from boxers and from watching boxing. You see a lot of people in MMA imitating like Prince Nassim and stuff like that in their fights. As for the stance, like a big difference between the octagon and a boxing ring, whether it's a big ring or a small ring, the shape really makes a difference. You can keep a much longer distance, but it is so much worse to be caught in a corner of a ring than it is to be caught against the fence in MMA, just in terms of maneuverability. In MMA, the fence has its drawbacks because you can't like lean back into it. You can't get any more space once you hit the fence in MMA. So it really puts an onus on you to avoid it at all costs. Whereas you can play off of the ropes in boxing, but the corner it's 90 degrees. It's a square. And so if you have a good person standing right between you and the center of the ring, you've got about 1.5 feet on either side to misdirect and evade what they're doing, maybe sting them with a punch and get out. That takes a lot of energy, especially for someone like McGregor, who tends to kind of explode into everything. Even when he's not throwing full power, there tends to be a lot of energy that he's directing into his body, these big leaping athletic movements. But B, as soon as you find a corner or the ropes in a ring, which I must point out is like what? Let's see, what's a 20-foot ring is 500 feet square, and I think the octagon is like 800 or 900. So there's just a lot less room to take advantage of that longer distance. MMA fighters can afford to keep a really long distance. Boxers tend not to, not only because they like a closer distance, but because they don't really get to have a longer distance, because usually one of them is trying to get the other one against the ropes. So I mean, I don't know. Having a long side stance is a good way to quickly leap into the corner, but you're going to need excellent lateral movement. You're going to need excellent distance management. You can't just fight from farther away. You have to make the other person respect that space, which means you have to hit them and you have to threaten them. And you have to do all of that while making sure you don't get stuck in a corner, while making sure you don't run into the ropes, and while making sure you don't miss so badly that the other person puts you to sleep with a big shot. So again, the MMA weirdness is not so weird that Floyd Mayweather probably couldn't pick up on it pretty quickly.
Right, and you also answered my next question about the difference between the ring and the cage, so I'm going to be jumping all around here. My next one is, your cohort, Dr. Patrick Wyman, was on a Twitter spree the other day talking about this fight, and in his train of tweets, he basically said, those who don't watch boxing truly won't and don't understand the skill gap between Conor and Floyd. My basic question, so I'm assuming you agree with that sentiment?
Yeah, and it's not like it isn't the obvious skills. I think that's why people really are overlooking this. And then other people who are really hammering this home, like boxing fans who are like, oh, McGregor's an amateur. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's never boxed. He has no idea how to box. They're missing the point too. Because the fact is that McGregor can do most of the basic techniques that any Mayweather opponent has been able to do. He has a solid jab. He's got a great straight left. He's got a good uppercut. He can pivot. He can hop step. He can, he moves well. He's even got developing some really nice head movement, although I think evading so many punches is also what caused him to gas out in that first Nate Diaz fight, because the way he moves his head is very, very, like everything he does, explosive and dramatic. It's not like the very easy, effortless defensive moves of a Floyd Mayweather. But the skills that really matter fight at this level are like pro skills, like understanding rhythm and understanding pacing and understanding the psychology that goes into a 12-round fight. McGregor didn't know how to pace himself for a 5-round fight until he had lost one. And it only took him 2 rounds to lose it. And 12 rounds of boxing it is a lot of thinking to do in a row for a fighter like McGregor, who likes to have the luxury of thinking through his options. It's a lot of thinking to do. It's a lot of layers of thought, which is why I brought up that 4 rounds until Mayweather figures you out thing. It's like a fighter like McGregor tends to exhaust most of his options, because as soon as something doesn't work, he might try something else. And that doesn't work, he'll try something else. How many times can you repeat that process before you run out of moves and you start repeating and you become predictable? The key is not trying different things, but knowing dozens of different ways to try any one thing. Floyd Mayweather has won 12-round fights basically with his left hand only, just jabbing people, hitting them with left hooks, jabbing them to the body. You don't land those jabs because a jab is easy to land. In fact, pro boxers are really good at not getting hit with jabs. And yet somebody like Mayweather, a really experienced, classy pro, knows how to find an opening for that jab over and over and over again, and knows how to keep finding different ways to get to that opening or to cause that opening to open back up again. And I think those are the kinds of things that really matter here. It's not that McGregor doesn't know how to box. It's that McGregor doesn't know how to win a 12-round boxing match. That's the real difference.
So, yeah, it's highly unlikely that Conor McGregor is going to somehow pull off a decision victory over Floyd Mayweather. If Conor wins, everyone said it, it's within the first 4 rounds, and it's going to be by TKO, which I think, does Floyd have one official knockdown on his record?
That he's been knocked down? I'm not sure he has any, actually. He may have one. He might have one. Don't ask me to name statistics with any exactitude.
It's either 1 or 0, and there was one where he got, he went down, but it didn't count as a knockdown.
Yeah. There was one where he was weirdly knocked down, maybe by Castillo. I can't remember exactly. And there was another one in a fight in Mexico, I think, early in his career. Maybe it was Jesus Chavez. Carlos Hernandez. No, I think he beat the hell out of Carlos Hernandez. But he didn't get knocked down because he's never in a position to be knocked down, right? A lot of times you get knocked down, not because you have a bad chin, but because you're off balance or your knees aren't bent or you're leaning too far back or any number of things. And again, Mayweather is the systematic fighter of this age. Everything he does happens for a reason. Everything is kind of preordained in how he chooses his attacks and his defenses. So a very, very hard man to knock down. And again, I've seen Mayweather staggered. The Mosley fight is the big example. But Mosley really hurt Mayweather with a right hand, and he didn't go down, and he smartly held on for a bit, and then he got his wits back and got into the fight. You can surprise Mayweather. Anybody can be surprised. And who knows, at 40 years old, he's probably more surprisable now than he ever was before. But, he made like a good fighter like Andre Berto look like a clown in his last fight, and he barely seemed to try to do it. So the I don't know. I'm ambling all over the place here, but it's not easy to simply knock Floyd Mayweather down. He has a good chin. He's very difficult to hit clean, and when you do hit him clean, he's not just relying on his chin. He's in the right position to absorb that punch and usually to respond to it.
I know you're short on time, so I'll try to get some more questions out as fast as I can.
Take your time. That's fine.
The next one is, so Floyd is 40. He's been out for 2 years. Conor McGregor obviously has a huge youth advantage and a ring rust advantage, if you could say. Do you see any advantages for Conor beyond being younger and have fought more recently?
If Floyd underestimates him, I think that's a very real X factor in this scenario, because the whole boxing world is gathering to laugh at Conor McGregor for his foolish endeavor. And so if Floyd doesn't take him seriously, like I said, McGregor technically and power, speed, athletically, he's a good boxer. That's what he does in MMA, is box people up. So he has an opening there. Now, whether that opening will lead immediately to the end of the fight, that's what we just covered. That's very unlikely. Finding one or two openings is not the same as knocking Floyd Mayweather out. But youth, I guess. I mean, speed, maybe at this point, maybe Mayweather's McGregor's the faster guy, but Floyd has always been incredibly fast. And so a slower, middle-aged Floyd is still faster even than most professional boxers, I would say. And as long as, again, his chin hasn't completely eroded, as long as he's taking the fight seriously, as long as he looks anything like the Floyd Mayweather we last saw in the ring 2 years ago, then the element of surprise is really the only thing that I see as a predictable. It's not predictable. It's the element of surprise, but that's the only like reliable way that McGregor could win, is just by shocking Mayweather. And again, like, you're not going to do that just by throwing a lot of wild punches at him. You're not going to do it just by swarming him. People have tried that. Jose Luis Castillo tried it twice. Marcos Maidana tried it twice. Manny Pacquiao couldn't actually even get it going. Like, people try to swarm Floyd Mayweather. It's hard. It's very, very hard. So as long as Mayweather's even on his B game, 4 rounds and he'll have it in the bag, I think.
Yeah, so then my next question is, what is the most likely outcome? So probably Floyd via decision, but he could possibly get a TKO late when...
Yeah, Floyd also talked about like going toe-to-toe with Manny Pacquiao, and he definitely didn't do that. So I wouldn't put any stock into him saying he wants to go out there and knock McGregor out, because he says that before a lot of his fights, and it's just not the way he usually fights these days. But if Conor gasses as dramatically as he did in that Nate Diaz fight, then the end could come surprisingly suddenly in favor of Floyd. Because again, this is a guy with 26 knockouts out of 49 wins. Yeah, most of them are not recently. Most of them came when his hands were in better shape. But he's still got the speed, the precision, and the know-how to put away a fighter who is in a badly compromised position. Victor Ortiz made the mistake of trying to hug Floyd Mayweather and got knocked out for it. So I know he can still knock people out. And I think probably I'm going to assume that McGregor does get tired. And I think once he gets tired, it's a snowball rolling downhill in the wrong direction. I think that at that point, maybe Mayweather's usually really good in the 8th round. So I'm going to say Mayweather 8th round TKO would be my prediction.
And I know you say all the time on the vivisection that you're not much of a gambling guy, so don't follow your gambling advice. But
right.
This is crazy to me. On Sports Interaction, Floyd is minus 357, which, what the hell? And on 5 Dimes, Floyd via TKO is minus 137. I usually go with 5 Dimes.
That's a surprise. Minus 100 or so odds that he's going to knock McGregor out. Like that's not that unlikely, is it? Yeah, that's a little shocking to me.
Check this out. Floyd Mayweather wins by decision plus 245.
So people think he is probably going to knock McGregor out, is what I would gather from that. That he won't go to decision. But even there, like, it's how he usually wins. Like, there's got to be some value there. I don't know. This is why I don't bet, because everything looks good to me. So
I think Floyd on 5 dimes earlier today was minus 525.
Yeah.
That seems good to me.
Yeah, and Mayweather, again, Mayweather has been much, much longer odds than that against much more experienced boxers in the past. Mayweather's had like minus 800 odds, minus 1200 odds in his fights.
He
So
was more of a favorite against Canelo.
right, who gave him a fight that was a lot more competitive, I think, than most give it credit for, and still Floyd convinced Canelo by the end of the fight that he wasn't as good as Floyd. Like when the guy teaches you how much better he is than you by fighting you, that's demoralizing. And that's why Floyd wins decisions, even when he doesn't really seem to care about putting a stamp on the fight. I don't know whether he will actually, like, he might just enjoy toying with an exhausted Conor McGregor if Conor really does gas that badly. But even if Conor doesn't, he's only going to be able to do that by really cutting down on his volume. And if he does that, Mayweather kind of gets to pick his spots. So Mayweather at any kind of underdog odds is a little shocking to me.
Yeah, plus 245 for the decision, minus 137 for a KO or TKO. And even there's a lot of value on a lot of these Ladbrokes, minus 400 for Floyd, just straight, no prop. I like that. Floyd opened at minus 3,000.
And he's dropped to minus 400 on some of these books.
Yeah, that's bonkers to me. So my last question to you would be, so if I'm in a room full of other casual combat sports fans, I'm a casual combat sports fan, and we're all chatting about the fight prior to the fight, what is like one thing I could say to the rest of the room that could make me sound like the most informed person in the room?
Okay. All right. You want like a canned sharp opinion, but so you don't want to go the route of everybody is now jumping on the McGregor has no chance train. So you can't go that route. And
right, that doesn't seem like an informed thing. That just seems like a popular. See, I'm with the Conor Ruebusch most informed thing.
I would say that this fight is going to be decided by subtlety, and that while McGregor's subtlety stands out in the MMA world, the things he does that are subtle are boxing moves, and the level of subtlety in his boxing in MMA does not stand out at all compared to the level of subtlety you see from boxers in boxing. So things like understanding pace, understanding how and when to counter, understanding when to just let the other guy throw and not even respond, just let him miss. Like those are the kinds of things you can do in boxing to control how the fight plays out without letting the other person know you are controlling how they fight. That's the kind of thing I think that's going to decide this. Mayweather is going to figure out what Conor has, then he's going to work on taking it away, and then he will probably, even if just for a couple rounds, around rounds 8 through 10 maybe, which is when he really put it on Canelo, around that point he's going to start using those openings to his own advantage, most likely, and landing some solid shots. And it's all going to come down to, okay, here, I'll clean it up for you. Here's what you say to your friends. Why has Floyd Mayweather had the same fight against so many different boxers? Because he has. Floyd Mayweather has had this fight where he gives away 2 or 3 rounds, he figures the guy out, takes away his tools, beats him up a bit, and then coasts to the decision win in the last 2. That is something Floyd has done maybe dozens of times in his career. And why is that? It's because Floyd Mayweather, even more than most boxers, understands how to dictate the pace and the style of a boxing fight. And that is not something you can learn unless you are also an experienced professional boxer.
I know I said that was my last question. I have one more. My girlfriend wanted me to ask you this question.
Okay.
So I have to do it. Otherwise, I'm going to be in trouble, probably sleeping on the couch. So let's say that Conor McGregor does win. He shakes up the world. What does that mean for boxing? What does that mean for MMA? Do you think, I mean, it's obviously significant.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, it doesn't destroy anything for me. Like, we've already had MMA fighters win in K1. We've had K1 fighters win in MMA. And we'll probably in the future have crossovers between boxing and MMA because they have a lot in common. Being a good boxer, as Conor McGregor has proved, does very well for you in MMA. So it's not as if it's like a completely alien idea, but it would be a mistake, I think, to look at this and say the fools are going to come out if that happens and say that MMA is better than boxing, even in the boxing rule set. And that's obviously not the case. There are tons and tons of things that MMA fighters can learn from boxers now and will continue to do so in the future. And there are many things that may not be useful in boxing, but useful skills overall that boxers could learn from mixed martial artists. They're different sports. They just are different. And they, like a triathlete and a marathon runner, they contain a lot of the same elements, some of the same elements, but they're different. So it doesn't make Floyd Mayweather as a representative of boxing. That doesn't prove that boxing is inferior to MMA, nor will it prove that MMA is inferior to boxing. And likewise, if the predicted result happens, the widely predicted result, it obviously does not mean that MMA is inferior to boxing. It's a boxing match. You have to give the advantage to the boxer. So I'm just going to ride the chaos, man. If Conor McGregor wins this fight, there's going to be a lot of X factors to talk about right afterwards that everyone's going to use, probably including myself, to explain away what happened. Mayweather's chin was gone. Mayweather didn't take him seriously. Mayweather looked old. Mayweather looked slow. But also, it's just going to be a crazy thing. And I guess the final thing I could say is that's why we watch fights anyway, is because crazy, insane things happen. And massive upsets happen in boxing. Why couldn't a massive upset happen from MMA to boxing? So if it happens, I'm going to enjoy it. It'll be bananas. But I will probably wait until then to figure out what it means for my view of the world of combat sports.
Right. That's exactly why I watch combat sports, because of the unpredictability.
Right.
Every other sport does not seem to be as unpredictable as mixed martial arts, as boxing, as any combat sport, because one shot could finish it. One Hail Mary down doesn't do an entire, but one nicely placed left cross counter from Conor McGregor could spell, upset city. Conor, thank you so much for joining me. I really, really appreciate it. If you want to tell the listeners, the viewers, where they can find you, I'm sure you have a ton of stuff in the works for besides Heavy Hands with Dr. Patrick Wyman coming up in the next 9 days.
Yeah, check out. We just did an episode this week for Heavy Hands on the best camps and coaches in MMA, which was a lot of fun. So check that out, Heavy Hands Podcast. You can find those posted weekly on bloodyelbow.com. You can also subscribe. And we have a Patreon. If you want to support us, we release 2 or more bonus episodes every single month. It costs $3 a month. It's very affordable, and we appreciate that. You can also find my UFC previews at sherdog.com. You can find my analytical and more opinion-based articles at bloodyelbow.com. And you can find me on Twitter at boxingbush, BUSCH.
And I will link all of his stuff in the comments or in the description box below for the YouTube, iTunes, SoundCloud, wherever it is. So you can just click that and have to go there. Don't have to spell anything out. Truly, truly appreciate you for being here, Conor. Thank you so much. And thank you, fight fans, for tuning in. Namaste.